Please subscribe to Bear Nerd Fund. Smash the like button. Goodbye.
Hail to all. We do not need. Hail to all. Hail to all. Now come on, Hollywood. Stop smelling your own farts. You might get mistaken for arse sniffers. Remember, when you go woke, you go broke. Hail to the Fandom Menace. Well, hail to the Fandom Menace. Well, you know it's getting serious when Forbes starts getting in on what George Lucas didn't like and how he felt betrayed. Hell of a thing. By Erik Kain in the games section, senior contributor. Yeah, George don't look too happy in this picture. As with all things Star Wars, from The Empire Strikes Back to Jar Jar Binks, the newest trilogy of films in Skywalker Saga have been controversial. That's not surprising with the fandom deeply invested in decades-long space opera franchise. You're never going to please everyone, of course. With the latest two films in the series, Solo, A Star Wars Story, and Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, controversy has only deepened. The Last Jedi in particular was a divisive film. Wow. Access Media actually calling it a divisive film. Things change, huh? It almost makes one wonder what would have happened if Disney had followed George Lucas' script outlines more closely. It turns out Lucas had the final three films mapped out, but Disney was under no obligation to use his ideas through to the finish. In his recent memoir, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger reflects on the Lucasfilm acquisition and Lucas's early days working with Disney on a new trilogy via Digital Spy. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Walt Disney Company Senior Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary Alan Braverman, and one for Co-Chairman and Chief Creative Officer, Walt Disney Studios, Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we needed to buy them, though we made clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out. On a side note, maybe he should have. Maybe he should have made it contractually obligated. Yeah. Back to the article. He knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept. And so he reluctantly agreed to be available to consult with us at our request. I promised that we would be open to his ideas. This was not a hard promise to make. Of course, we would be open to George Lucas's ideas. But, like the outlines, we would be under no obligation. Well, when Lucas met with Disney to go over the trilogy's direction, he discovered that the company would not be using all his ideas. Here's Iger again, in a quote. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that we weren't using one of his stories he submitted during the negotiations. In the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed. And while this whole process would never have been easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. You think? You think he got off to a rocky start? Just proves us fans in the fandom menace that we were right. Those of us that weren't YouTubers quite yet, watching what everyone was talking about, they were right. The force of other companies buying yours out. So, what to make of all this? It's easy to feel bad for Lucas, whose own creation was suddenly no longer his to shape and direct. One can only imagine what that must feel like. Then again, it's even more difficult to imagine having billions of dollars in 2012. Disney acquired Lucasfilm for $2.2 billion in cash and $1.855 billion in stock. That's a very large pile of money to comfort oneself over loss of creative control. I also am reminded of the prequel trilogy. That sentence could have been worded differently. Which Lucas had total control over, and which was, in every sense of the word, terrible. Darth Vader became an angsty emo teenager. Lucas tried to do way too much with CGI. The trade war stuff was interesting, but far too predominant. We got midichlorians, for goodness sake. You know, I would take the midichlorians over the crap that Disney made. The Disney Star Wars crap. George Lucas is an idea guy. He has great ideas. He's not necessarily a script guy. However, in a large part of the original trilogy's success was his collaboration with other writers and directors who helped turn his ideas into engaging filmmaking. It's not clear from Iger's reflections just how much was changed, or what plot points Disney tossed out or kept alive, or how this would, look if Lucas had maintained control over his IP. It's easy to say, in retrospect, that Lucas would have done a better job, but there's a little evidence to back that argument. One has to look through rosy-tinted glasses to believe such a thing. It's also important to remember that Lucas was under no obligation to sell before finishing his 9-movie cycle. He could have finished his next 3 films first. The fact is, he didn't. There was no indication he would have either. The Return of the Jedi released in 1983. It wasn't until 1999 that The Phantom Menace hit theaters. That's even slower than another George I'm a big fan of, whose name I will not mention. I was 2 when Jedi came out, and was graduating high school when I sat down to watch Phantom Menace. Much to my horror and dismay, I generally like the new Star Wars movies, though not as much as the originals. Maybe more input and guidance from Lucas would have helped them hew closer to ideas in fiction that Lucas intended. Maybe fans would be happier, who knows. The final installment of Skywalker Saga, The Rise of Skywalker, hits theaters on December 20th. Interesting. Now come on, Hollywood. Stop smelling your own farts. You might get mistaken for arse sniffers. Remember, when you go woke, you go broke.
Please subscribe to Bear Nerd Fund. Smash the like button. Goodbye.
Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Say hello.
Hello.
Say nerd fun. Nerd fun. Nerd fun. Say goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hail, TFM,